So welcome to the Lone Tree Art Center's virtual Spark presentation, everyone. We're so glad to be here with you today. Thanks for joining us. I'm Lee Chandler. I'm the marketing director at the Lone Tree Art Center, and I'm going to be moderating today's Spark. First, I'd like to thank our sponsors for this program. We have Charles Schwab, Morningstar Senior Living, Belco, Merrick, and the Scientific and Cultural Facilities District, and one more to add, which is Colorado Creative Industries, a late addition.
Nice.
While we won't have social time after today's program like we normally do for Spark, it's going to be interactive today, as most of our live streams are. So please participate if you feel comfortable. If you don't want to speak out loud, you can definitely type it in the chat or send a message to me, the host of Lone Tree Art Center, and I'll say your answer out loud, but feel free to unmute yourself so that you can participate. If there's background noise, I might mute you just so that it doesn't interfere with people who are speaking, but you can unmute yourself whenever you like. And again, if you don't feel comfortable being seen on the screen, feel free to turn off your video. We will not take offense whatsoever. And now for the presentation. Today, we're traveling to Egypt with Maureen, Holland. If you joined us for our trip to Vietnam with Maureen, you know that we are in for a good time. Maureen is one of our long-term ushers, and she's been very involved with our community impact programs, particularly as an ambassador for our student matinees, but also with Spark. So you probably have seen her before. If not through the trip to Vietnam, you may remember when we were doing in-person Sparks, Maureen presented about her trip to Peru and also Russian folk tales. So we're really, really thrilled that she is coming back to us today to talk to us about her trip to Egypt. Please welcome Maureen Holland.
Well, thank you, Lee, for that wonderful introduction, and welcome to everyone to another Spark program on Zoom. I'm just really thrilled to be able to share some of my pictures and my stories about Egypt today. And as you all know, because you signed up for it, we are going to visit the country of Egypt. But if I hadn't told you that, and you were looking at this first picture, are there clues in this first picture that gave away where we're going to visit today?
Mm-hmm.
What do you see in this photograph?
A pyramid.
Say it again.
We're in Egypt. It's a Sphinx. I haven't been there.
Wonderful. Okay. Yes, that is the Great Pyramid of Giza, one of the three Great Pyramids. And in front of it, you see a picture of the stone Sphinx. Look at some of the tinier, smaller details within the photograph. What do you notice? You might notice the scaffolding that is next to the side of the Sphinx. So they're doing ongoing restoration to keep it from crumbling and eroding. And you may also notice quite a few people that are visiting the pyramid that day. And if your eyes are really good, I know it's hard to see in a tiny screen, you might see a camel and other animals that are amongst the people in the background. I love having the people in the photograph because it gives you really an idea of the grandeur size of these pyramids. Well, if you visited with me before, as I share about my travels, I like to always begin with a picture of a map. So this is a map called Egypt Then and Today. And does anybody know on what continent Egypt is located?
Africa.
You're right. It is in the northeast part of Africa. Let's look at some of the bodies of water that are either bordering or running through central Egypt. What are some of the bodies of water you see on this map?
Everyone's so quiet. Unmute yourselves.
I know. Well, if you look at the very top of your screen, you probably are seeing the Mediterranean Sea, and it borders Egypt to the north. And if you look to the right of the map, you see another blue area, And what does that one say?
Red Sea.
Red Sea borders it to the east. And right down the center of Egypt runs a very famous river. What river is that?
The Nile.
Nile.
Absolutely, the Nile. Yay, thank you for sharing. Okay. When I look at this map, I notice most of the coloring of Egypt is from yellow to tan to gold. Why do you think that most of Egypt is colored that way on this map?
Desert.
Absolutely. It's part of the Western Desert. It's very arid and dry. However, you see green running through. Why do you suppose there's a strip of green?
Water.
Irrigation from the Nile.
Mhm.
Absolutely. The Nile is the lifeblood of Egypt. You'll also see a lot of green up to the north as the Nile fans out. It's the delta when the Nile goes and enters the Mediterranean Sea. Something unusual that before I went over, I had never really thought about before. If you look at some of the words that are in the white font, you'll notice up on the top, it's to the north of Egypt. It says Lower Egypt. And then you go down to the south, let your eyes follow the river down, and you see the words Upper Egypt. And that seemed kind of odd to me. I always thought upper would be to the north. Why do you suppose Lower Egypt is to the north and Upper Egypt is to the south?
Nile flows from south to north.
Absolutely. Water always flows downhill. So in this case, Luxor is a high point in elevation, and the water is flowing downhill until it empties into the Mediterranean Sea. So the high point is in the south and the lower point is to the north, kind of backwards from what I had originally pictured it. My husband and I were very fortunate to get to spend 2 weeks in Egypt in November of 2019. And although we had over 3,000 pictures, I'm only sharing a few with you today. And rather than share the ones you normally think of, like the Temple of Karnak or Luxor or the Valley of the Kings, my photographs are mainly of some maybe lesser known sites and places and things. So I'm going to start out with kind of an unusual object. So I'm going to give you a couple little hints about what you're seeing, and then I'm going to let you tell me what you see. First of all, this is an object that is housed in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo today. It is an important artifact. It's made out of stone. And the picture on the left side is the back of this object, and the picture on the right is the front side of the object. So let's look at some of the things that you see on this object. What do you notice?
Bodies and animals.
Okay, you see some people perhaps, you see some animals. What, if you look at the very top of the object, can you make out what those curly horns and the animal might be?
A
Is this some kind of a scroll?
The ram.
Ah,
Yes.
Those are good guesses. Some really great guesses. Those are actually cows, and they're representative of the goddess Hathor. And we're going to be talking a lot about the goddess Hathor throughout the slideshow. Okay, you also see some people. You see that beast that has like a monkey tail? It's the one on the right. It looks like it has a monkey tail and then long necks, and then they make kind of a circle.
Yes.
Oh, snake.
It could be a combination of monkeys and snakes or some kind of serpent. So just getting an idea, it's made out of stone, it is carved, it's an important artifact. What do you think this object might be?
Urn or
Oh, great guess. Any other guesses?
I'm sorry, I couldn't understand what the guess was.
What do you think the object might
Oh,
be?
I didn't understand his answer.
Oh, I
Urn.
think he said an urn.
Oh, okay.
Uh-huh.
Hmm.
Would it be an arrowhead?
It does have that shape, doesn't it? Kind of
Mhm.
has the arrowhead shape. Well, it's actually a palette. If you're painters, you know that you mix up your paints on a palette and you can change the shades and then apply them. And this particular object is called Narmer's palette. Narmer was the first king of Egypt. And he would, in that little round part where those two heads kind of make that circle, he would mix up, he would grind up
Huh.
minerals and use it to apply his eye makeup, okay? Or perhaps the palette was also used in grinding up offerings to give to the Egyptian gods. The reason this is such an important artifact is because it's considered the first historical document in the world.
Harry here.
Yes,
How are you?
good. I'm doing a Spark program.
Welcome, glad you're here.
No,
So,
I,
so the story that this palette is telling us is about how Egypt became unified under one king. So it's kind of hard to see. So let's do a close-up. So before I talk about the carvings themselves, look at the little picture on the bottom. You'll see three pictures of kings. The one on the left, the king is wearing the traditional white crown of Upper Egypt. The king in the middle is wearing the traditional red crown of Lower Egypt. And then the king to the right is combining both crowns, and they call this the double crown. And you see both the red and the white crown in the design. Well, in 3200 BC, Egypt had more than one king, and they were constantly warring, battling, kind of having friction among one part with another. Well, King Narmer set out to unify all of Egypt. The carving that is represented in the picture to the left shows King Narmer wearing the white crown. He was the king of Upper Egypt, and he is being shown with the mace in his hand, and he's got his hand holding on to the hair of his enemy. He is showing you he's about ready to smite him. He has conquered the other kings and other territories so that he can take over all of Egypt. The carving on the right, you can see Narmer. He is the tallest of the carvings, and he is now wearing the double crown, meaning that he is now the king of both Upper and Lower Egypt. So it was considered the historical event of the unification, of unifying all of Egypt. Pretty incredible, huh? So King Narmer also had another name. His name was King Menes, and he chose to build his capital in the north part of Egypt, in what had been enemy territory. And his capital city was Memphis. And this is a picture of Memphis as it looks today. What are some of the things you notice in this picture?
Some type of meat is hung there. I think it's meat.
Mhm,
And then
Absolutely.
fruits and vegetables.
mhm.
Yeah, you've got the vendors stands right there, right spilling out into the street. You see the sides of beef or whatever animal prominently on display in front of the butcher's shop. What else do you see?
You see modern transportation and primitive transportation.
Yeah, I see trucks, and I can't see the car because it's blocked off a little bit, but there are trucks and cars that are parked along the building. But then you see the donkey pulling a two-wheeled cart. What else do you notice?
The sporting goods store behind the donkey.
Okay. I noticed that some of the buildings are multi-level. They're 2 and 3 stories high. And I can even see electrical lines on the top of the slide. And then down below on the street, is the street paved?
Somewhat.
No.
It's hard to tell from this photograph, but it's actually dirt and rocks.
Mhm.
It's not even paved. So I love, like you pointed out, someone said, the contrast between old and new in this former capital city of Egypt. Well, not far from Memphis is Saqqara. And Saqqara, here I am in Saqqara. And what do you see behind me featured in the background?
Pyramid.
It is a pyramid.
Mhm.
How is this pyramid different than the Great Pyramid I showed you in the first photograph?
It has
Voted.
steps. It has steps.
It reminds me of a wedding cake. It's got
Oh,
layers to it.
Cheers.
It has steps or tiers, exactly. It is actually referred to as the step pyramid. And during the dynasty of King Dozier, his vizier and architect, who was Imhotep, designed this to be his tomb. And back then, they were buried in tombs of stone, and they were rectangular in shape. They were called mastabas. And Imhotep got the idea that he could take and stack these square mastabas, one on top of the other. And that was his innovative idea in building this wonderful tomb for his king. Well, this was just the first step that led us to the road to the Great Pyramids. Here's another pyramid. How is this pyramid different than the step pyramid?
Wow.
It's eroding.
Yes.
Yes, you see part of the outer smooth limestone covering has fallen off and is showing the blocks of stone inside. How else is it different?
The shape is different. The shape
The
is
shape
different.
is different. How, in what way?
This is more of a mound. You can't see the other side, so you can't tell if it's a triangle that is on top, but it's not the same height and it's much wider than the pyramids are. Well, I can't tell from comparing the pictures, but just the overall shape is different. It's a mound.
It is. It's a 4-sided pyramid rather than 3.
Okay.
But I want you to notice at the angle at which it is going up. So it starts out very steep.
Mhm.
And as the builders were constructing this, they found that it was starting to cave in on itself. So they had to change the angle from that steep angle to a little less steep angle. So you see on the side, if you look especially to the left, you see that bent look?
Yes.
Yes. So this pyramid has been given the name Bent Pyramid. And you did mention that it's eroding. So what do you think is causing that limestone covering to fall?
Age, wind, heat.
That would have been
There's-
my guess too. Weather, wind,
Mhm.
just the fact that it's more than about 3,000 BC. All of those are good guesses. The actual answer, though, is mostly that the early Egyptians were recyclers, and they took much of the outer covering for later temples and pyramids, and they recycled the materials.
Wow.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So my husband and I, being adventurous souls, or maybe foolhardy, decided to go inside the bent pyramid. So here's an entrance that leads down into the heart of the pyramid. It's actually a very steep ramp. It looks like those are steps, but they're not really. It's a slant of wood, and they've got little strips of wood so that you don't slip or slide. And you see the modern day wooden handrails. But I want you to notice how low the ceiling is. The ceiling is only about 4 feet tall. So to enter, we had to enter backwards. We entered with our bottoms going down first, holding on to the rails, and bent over to keep from hitting our head on the stone ceiling. And so we joke that that's why we call it the bent pyramid. Anyway, we descended this long ramp down to another chamber and climbed up to find another tunnel and another chamber with a corbelled ceiling. The whole thing gave me a really eerie, cold feeling inside. And although this particular pyramid was never used as a tomb for a king, it did inspire many, many more pyramids, eventually leading up to the Great Pyramids of Giza. So switching gears for a minute, this is something totally different. And I want to tell you the wooden floor, the lighting, the rails are all put in during modern times. But notice the structure itself. What do you see in this picture?
Tunnel.
It does look like a tunnel, doesn't it? What do you see that maybe is off to the sides?
Well, there's benches.
Yeah, those are modern time. But you're right. That's what you might see. Okay. But you see
Are
little
there-
rooms.
Are there tunnels to the right and to the left, connecting tunnels?
Wow, that's a great guess. Well, let's take a peek inside of one of those to the side. This is an alcove. And so to the right and to the left, all the way down through the tunnel and the many different avenues of the tunnel, you saw many, many, many alcoves. And what do you see that's inside the alcove?
It's a grave.
What might
It's a
I call that?
It's a tomb.
Somebody told
Is-
me once it looked like a coffin.
Isn't it?
It is. It's a sarcophagus.
Oh,
What might be found inside a sarcophagus?
Pharaoh.
A mummy.
That's what I would have guessed. Absolutely. And you're right. But it was not a human mummy. It was a sarcophagus for an animal. This was the
oh,
sacred Apis bull. And the whole entire complex is called a serapeum, which is a necropolis, which is a fancy word for an underground cemetery to honor and house these sacred bulls. So here's a relief from one of the temples that we visited, and we're going to see that temple a little later in the slideshow, of the Apis bull. And here you can see he has a headdress on. Well, he's supposed to be an incarnation of their ancient creator god, Ptah. And so in his horns, he has the sun, he's carrying the sun, and he has the two long, tall feathers. And that denotes that he is one of their gods. So this is the Apis bull. Now, the Apis bulls were really important to the pharaohs because if they had a long reign, such as Ramses II, who reigned for more than 60 years, they had to prove that they were still young and vital and could still be the leader of this powerful country. And so they actually fought and sacrificed the Apis bull. And then the bull was mummified and put in the necropolis. And by doing that, the pharaoh had proved his strength and his might and his right to continue ruling. So here my husband and I are inside one of the alcoves and we're lifting off the lid to get a peek inside. No, not really. We're strong as bulls maybe, but these sarcophagus weigh between 50 and 70 tons, so we're not that strong.
No.
And then you might or might not see, depending on where the speakers are showing up or people, but off to the right on the bottom is a drawing of the Apis bull. Well, bulls were not the only animals to be mummified. Look at some of the pictures in this photograph, or collection of photographs, I should say. What are some of the animals you see mummified here?
The ones on the right,
What do they look like, the ones on the right?
they look like baby tigers or cats.
Mhm. How about the ones on the left? Look at their
Could those be
shape.
alligators?
That's a wonderful guess. Actually, yes, they're crocodiles.
Okay.
Crocodiles that lived along the Nile. I think the one in the middle is the hardest to kind of get, especially when it's on a small screen. Notice that it's sitting upright, legs are crossed, long arms kind of resting in its lap. But look at its face. If you can see the shape of its face, it might help you. What do you think that animal might be?
Is that a platypus? Long arms though. Oh, a monkey. Is that a monkey?
Yeah. I'll go
Yeah,
with
it's a baboon.
Baboon.
Yeah. So why would these ancient Egyptians mummify some of these animals? What might be their reason?
Have they been pets?
They could have been beloved pets that they wanted to take with them to the afterlife. What else?
You have a gorilla or a alligator pet.
I don't think I would keep an alligator as a pet.
Maybe the alligators are there to protect them.
Oh, for protection. Any other guesses? Well, you're on the right track. Sometimes these animals were mummified so they could be given as gifts to honor the gods, their ancient gods. Sometimes they were beloved pets, and sometimes they were even offerings of food for the person in the tomb to help him along through his the underworld until he could be born again, resurrected. So let's take a look. This one, we were cruising along the Nile. We got to spend 6 nights on a riverboat. And one of the temples that we saw was the temple at Kom Ombo. And it was honoring the god of Sobek. So I hope you can see the carving or at least the drawing. And so Sobek has the head of what animal? So you can kind of tell from the long pointy shape. He has the head of a crocodile. And of course, on top of his head, he is wearing one of the crowns of the gods. So Sobek was the god of the Nile. And of course, Egyptians that would travel down the Nile might reach places that were very, very treacherous and dangerous. They might encounter huge rocks in the water or small islands and sandbars, or even if they were living close to the banks and had to go to the Nile for water or to get plants, they might encounter common crocodiles. So it would be very dangerous. So Egyptians prayed to the god Sobek for protection. And it was very common for the ancient Egyptians to have gods and goddesses with heads of animals, even sometimes bodies of animals. And they usually chose animals that were fierce or were hunters, and therefore they thought of them as their protectors. This picture is of a mural inside King Tut's tomb. What do you see pictured in this mural? You see any animals?
Yes.
Animals,
Uh-huh.
people,
Monkeys.
What are
baboons.
some? Mhm. I see geese. I see birds,
Baboons.
lots of
There's-
baboons.
There's an insect, a beetle.
Yeah, good eyes. You see some hieroglyphs. You see some designs, people. All of those things are pictured. You're right. Well, let's talk about the baboons first, since we had the mummy of the baboon in one of our slides. The baboon was admired for its intelligence. In fact, it became a symbol for one of their ancient gods, the god Thoth, which I don't know if you can see. There's a drawing to the far right bottom, but for me, it's covered up by some people that I'm seeing. But Thoth was the god of scribes that would record events and also of knowledge. Well, let's think about how the ancient Egyptians viewed the baboons. First of all, early in the morning, before the sun had risen, they would hear this cacophony of howls and this raucous crying out. And shortly thereafter, the sun would begin to rise and go up into the sky. So perhaps it wasn't such a hard leap to think that the baboons were calling for the sun to rise every morning. And eventually they thought of him as helping resurrect the sun back into the sky. The scarab beetle, which somebody noticed, the beetle up there on the top left, was another very common animal that was seen in ancient Egyptian times. If you know anything about how they mummified people, they removed all the organs and put them in canopic jars, except for the heart. And for the heart, they covered the heart with an amulet. An amulet is a little stone carving. This one is pretty tiny. I'm holding it up in my view. We should stop wiggling here. Of the scarab beetle. And the amulet of the scarab beetle was said to protect the heart of the person who was mummified. Again, thinking about the ancient Egyptians and how they observed nature, the beetle was seen laying its eggs in a little dung ball and then burying the dung ball. And later they might have observed that tiny little beetles were coming up from the ground. Again, the people observing that might have thought that the beetle had been buried and was now resurrected. So the scarab became a symbol of rebirth and renewal. I just have to share with you one of my prized souvenirs. And this was a bracelet that I bought in a souvenir shop on board the Nile boat. And if you could see it clearly, you would see there's a scarab beetle out of turquoise and lapis on my silver bracelet. So it's really one of my prized souvenirs. Okay. All right, taking a break from mummies here. We're back in Cairo, and this is a view from poolside looking out at a cityscape. What are some things you see in this picture?
There hibiscus flower and some daisies.
Yeah, remember I told you it was late November, and so I was surprised to see so many flowers in bloom, so much lush green, but it was really very temperate there, probably in the 70s most days that we were there, and even got warmer as we traveled south. What else do you see in the background?
It looks like there's buildings built on the water, on the Nile.
It does.
I'm assuming this is the Nile.
It is. That was a good guess, because this is the River Nile running through Cairo, and those are boats, and most of those are boats that are restaurant boats. So at night they would be all lit up and serve dinner as they would travel back and forth along the Nile. And you do see the city behind it. What kind of strikes you about the city of Cairo?
It has tall buildings.
Yeah, it's a very modern city, and the tallest one over there to the top left is the Cairo Tower. It has a revolving restaurant on top and beautiful views. And until 1970, it was the tallest building in all of Africa.
Hmm.
So I wasn't quite prepared for the modernness of Cairo, although there were pockets of those that kind of showed their age and were not as modern. Well, we talk about the River Nile is the longest river in the world, and it would flood, bringing its life-giving waters and also the nutrients. As it would flood, the mud would overflow the banks as well, bringing the nutrients and providing fertile ground for crops. And that's actually what made Egypt so prosperous and rich, was the River Nile. They also used the Nile for transportation. And when they wanted to build pyramids, when they wanted to build temples, they had to ship the stones, those big heavy stones blocks from the south, and they carried them along the waterway. So the Nile was just really the lifeblood. So in addition to crops and plants, there's one very special plant that was found along the Nile that's important, not only to ancient Egyptians, but to us as well. So here is a gentleman holding the plant. Any guesses what this plant might be? I'll give you a hint. Look behind the man on the wall, and you see some scrolls or pictures.
Bamboo.
That's a great guess. You're close. It's actually papyrus. A papyrus plant. That's where we get our word paper. Yeah. So how did they get this green plant into a scroll like you see behind this gentleman, or the paper they used for paintings? Well, first they stripped off the green outer layer of the stem, and they soaked the stem in water, and that helped release the sugar from the stem. Once the stems had lost most of their sugar content, they cut the stem in half and they pounded it flat. After pounding it, it was pressed between probably blocks of something, stone or wood, I'm not sure, but it was pressed to squeeze out the remaining water. Once it was flattened, it made these long strips, and they could take and weave them in and out like a mat. And here you see my husband, he is holding up a sheet of papyrus, and you can see how it has that woven look. And that's how you know it's real papyrus. It isn't all one shade or one color. But the really great thing about papyrus is it contains natural oils, and the natural oils are a deterrent to insects that might get into the plant or into the scrolls. And that's why we have found some of these ancient scrolls that are still mostly intact today, because they are preserved by those natural oils. Pretty incredible. So my husband and I were so just amazed by this whole process. This particular photo is taken inside the museum, the Papyrus Museum. So they do everything with hand tools. They do everything the way the ancient Egyptians would have done it. So we were so enamored with these beautiful paintings that are all hand done with natural colors that we purchased one to bring home. And before I tell you about this painting, tell me what you see. What are some of the things you notice in this painting?
Is it a wedding papyrus?
Yes. Who might the wedding couple be?
You and your husband.
Oh, I don't think we're that old.
Cleopatra,
I didn't
is
hear
it-
that.
King Tut, and I don't know. Or is it Cleopatra? I don't know who it's depicting.
Mark
Wow.
Anthony.
What was the last one?
Mark Anthony.
Yeah, I wasn't quite sure what was said on the last one. What do you see surrounding the couple in the middle?
Trees, does it mean fertility?
You're thinking that the plants or the trees are
the
representing
plants,
fertility for
yeah,
the couple?
Correct.
Interesting. And look at the very bottom of the painting. What do you notice about the very bottom?
Are those the gods to protect their marriage, maybe?
I
Snake,
love that.
Birds,
Birds.
Those are hieroglyphs.
hieroglyphs.
Hieroglyphs are pictures or symbols that can either represent a letter or a sound like a syllable or an entire word, or sometimes even have a bigger meaning than just a single word. Those hieroglyphs actually were hand painted in front of us. And you see at the bottom, the one on the left, there's a snake and then two kind of slanted lines, which are reeds, and an owl. And those represent J-I-M, Jim, my husband's name, and the rest is Anne Maureen. So, boy, whoever guessed King Tut, wow, that's exactly, this portrait was called Love and Happiness. And it is of King Tut and his bride on their wedding day. And she is presenting to him lotus flowers, which is a symbol of her love for him. Underneath, and I don't know if you can even see this, are two common people, and they are also picking lotus flowers to give as a gift to the bride. All around King Tut and his bride are a combination of the lotus flowers and the papyrus. So speaking of pharaohs, I have a special surprise for you today. I think we are going to be visited by a pharaoh. Let's see if I can call him. Pharaoh, are you ready? Pharaoh. Here he comes now.
Hey, Maureen. Sorry I'm late. I was down by my parents' tomb visiting. You know, I sure miss my mummy.
Mommy.
Hello, everyone.
Dad. Hey.
Hey, I'm the Pharaoh. I would really like to invite you over to my palace for a decaffeinated beverage. I know you don't have the time. My palace is huge, beautiful pillars with my cartouche all over them. I got really wealthy running a huge pyramid scheme.
Oh,
You know what? Over here, this is today's issue of the Pharaonic Times. It's our local news papyrus. Let's see
Pharaonic.
what's going on. Okay, let's see. Oh, here's an interesting article. It's an article about a departed relative of mine, Ramesses II. Ramesses was a pharaoh for over 60 years, and he fought in many battles. He was considered the greatest of all time, and his nickname was Tom Brady.
Oh,
Here's a crossword puzzle. They're really difficult. They're done with hieroglyphs. Here's one you might be interested in. It's 14 across. It says, how is a whistle like a pharaoh? 4 letters. I know. Toot. They have toot in common.
oh my gosh.
That's a stretch.
King Tut, King
well-
Toot. I got it.
Well, I must go now. Maureen is going to visit you again. Me, I'm going to take it easy and spend the rest of the day in denial.
Oh,
Bye-bye.
floating in denial.
Yes. Enjoy.
Well, thank you, Pharaoh, for sharing that with us. I'm sure we all got a chuckle. So speaking of queens, which queen do you see is represented On this papyrus,
It's Cleopatra.
that's right. She's the most famous, probably, of the Egyptian queens, but she's not the only female pharaoh. She was the last pharaoh of the, oh gosh, I'm sorry, I lost my breath here for a minute. She is the last pharaoh during the Ptolemaic pharaohs before Egypt was ruled by Romans. So perhaps she's the best known, but she was not the only female pharaoh. We were going down the Nile, and near the Valley of the Kings, we stopped at the mortuary temple of Queen Hatshepsut, another female pharaoh. Let's take a look at her mortuary temple. Look at the top left picture. What do you notice about her temple?
It's built into the side of a wall.
Yeah, that's the first thing that really strikes me, is that it is built into the side of a mountain. It's very symmetrical, isn't it? And you see the columns going up, and then you see the big grand stairway leading up to the top. It's hard to get a real feel for the size because I'm trying to show you what the temple looked like, but it was enormous and it has been somewhat restored. As we walk up to the temple, you see it guarded by these huge statues of Queen Hatshepsut. Now, Hatshepsut was an unusual queen. First of all, she was born the daughter of a pharaoh, Thutmose I. She married her stepbrother, Thutmose II, who became pharaoh. And unfortunately, though, he died at a very early age. And his heir, Thutmose III, was a very young child at the time. So she became the queen regent. But after a while, she became so popular and did so much for Egypt, she became a pharaoh. Now, the thing that's most unusual about Hatshepsut is that she dressed herself as a male. And so you notice in the statue, she's donned the kilt of the male, she's bare-chested, and she's holding the crook and flail in front of her, and she's even donned the false beard that the male pharaohs would wear. Hatshepsut ruled Egypt for 15 years, during which time she led military campaigns. She was a prolific builder, and Egypt really prospered both in crops and trade with other countries around them. So she was a very successful pharaoh in her own right. She dedicated part of her temple here, her mortuary temple, to the goddess Hathor. And you'll remember back when we were looking at the Narmer palette, I mentioned those cows. You could just see a little bit of their head and the horns up on the top of the palette. The goddess Hathor was a very important goddess. She represented fertility, love, music, and happiness. So as we were traveling, we came to the ancient city of Dendera, and here is the temple of Hathor. Now you can see here in the little drawing that she has cow horns as part of her crown, and that she sometimes has the cow head too, but here she has the cow horns, and inside her horns is the sun. Now, you can't see very well if you have pictures going down of the audience and the speakers, but the picture on the lower right is inside the temple. And here you can see on top of the column, you see the goddess Hathor. And then behind her, you see the carvings or reliefs that are on the ceiling, and beautiful blue color. This probably was one of the prettiest temples we visited on the inside. Well, let me tell you a minute about Hathor. First of all, she was the goddess of love, music, and celebration, and she was married to a very important god, the god Horus. And Horus is sometimes pictured as a falcon, and he would fly in the sky. Hathor's name actually means house of Horus, meaning that she was part of the sky and he would fly and she lived in the house of Horus. Her father was the sun god, Ra. And sometimes it's said that when she was in the sky, she would pick up the sun in her horns and help carry her father, the sun, across the sky. She was quite a powerful goddess. She was the one that controlled the floods of the Nile. She also commanded the wind to blow. She also brought new plants and animals to Egypt. And, you know, cows are often seen as protective mothers. So she was worshipped by young mothers, pregnant mothers, as a protector of children, their pregnancy, and their home. She was much beloved. On the ceiling inside her temple, I don't know where I'm picking up those little funny little lines, whatever. On the ceiling inside the temple was another goddess. This is the goddess Nut. I chose this because I just was so struck by the beautiful blues that were woven throughout the murals in this temple. What do you see the goddess Nut doing? What are her hands doing? Well, they're stretched up. They're reaching up to the sky, aren't they?
Mhm.
And then she has something round that's resting on her lips. What do you think that round thing might be?
A tennis ball.
I didn't know that. Could have been, huh?
The moon,
The moon. You're on the right track.
sun.
Yes. It is said that the goddess Nut was the goddess of the sky, and every evening she swallowed the sun, taking the sun inside her body. And it traveled through her body all night, and in the morning she gave birth to the sun. And so that's why the sky is often bright red early when the sun first comes up. Well, now for something completely different again. We're back to the Nile. Take a look at this picture, and what are some of the things you see here? What do you see right in the center?
Sailboat.
Ship.
Mhm.
A sailboat?
Mhm.
And
Wow.
notice how beautiful and green everything. Do you see the palm trees?
Mm.
Yes.
Kind of up against the sky view.
Mhm.
Looking at this photograph, how does it make you feel?
Relaxed.
It's very calm. It's
Mhm.
peaceful. It's serene. It's tranquil. It made me feel just so relaxed traveling along the Nile on our riverboat. And that's why when I heard a strange sound, these callings, this cacophony coming from below, I looked over. I was on the top deck of our riverboat, and I looked over and I was so surprised to see two men in a rowboat. And these men had attached a tow rope to the bow of our ship, and they were calling up to the top deck to get our attention. And once they had our attention, they unfurled these beautiful Egyptian linen tablecloths. And of course, they were trying to sell them to us. So they would take these tablecloths and put them in a clear plastic bag, and they would throw them up to the top deck, where the tourists would then take them out and examine them and look at them. And if they were interested, bargaining would start to happen, and they would haggle over the prices. And if a satisfactory price was agreed upon, then the tourist would put the money back into the plastic bag tie it, and throw it overboard to these two men in the rowboat. And sometimes the bag would fall into the water, but fortunately it would float and they would fish it out. But it just was such a startling contrast to the serenity and tranquility of the Nile that I just thought it was a funny story to share with you. Well, during the 20th century, Egyptians decided they needed to have better control of the flooding of the Nile. And so they decided to build a dam in Aswan. And as they were making plans to build this dam in Aswan, they realized that many of the ancient temples and relics and just beautiful treasures of the past would become submerged and lost forever in the rising waters that this dam would cause. So they got together and they did a massive undertaking before the dam was finished to move these temples to higher ground and back away from the banks to save them. You have to imagine these temples were all made out of stone, carved blocks of stone, had to be cut into big, huge chunks, 20-ton chunks of stone, and each one had to be labeled with a metal disc and numbered, and then reassembled, transported and reassembled. So here is one of the temple complexes that was rescued in the making of the dam. This temple complex is called Abu Simbel. And I think this is one of my favorite photographs because it is taken from our airplane, looking down from the plane to the temples below. And you can see the temples are facing the Nile. Can you imagine the Nubians who were conquered by the Egyptians, as they would travel into Egypt, would see these colossal temples and statues? They must have been filled with awe and respect and maybe even fear for these powerful, powerful people who could build such mighty temples. So it was absolutely phenomenal. You can see perhaps a bit of one of the metal discs, and each disc had to be numbered to be reassembled like a 3D jigsaw puzzle. So let's take a closer look at the temples of Abu Simbel. This one is the temple of King Ramses II. What are some things you notice in this particular photograph?
Are those soldiers sitting outside protecting the tomb?
Good guess.
Or
What
the
else could they be?
His high priests?
If it's a temple, his high priest. What else do you see?
What's above their head, those animals?
Yeah, those little things.
Oh, it's an animal we've talked about that calls to the sun.
Mhm.
The
Are
baboon.
they- Oh, the baboons.
The baboons.
Oh, okay.
Okay. I've had people guess a lot of different things. I thought your guesses were wonderful. These are actually 4 colossal statues of Ramses himself. Now, they appear to look different because over time the erosion and some crumbling have taken place. So they don't look to be identical, but originally all 4 of these colossal statues were of Ramses the Great. You notice one has collapsed. The head is missing, the torso is missing. They found it this way, and when they were moving it, they chose to keep it the way it was found rather than reconstruct it to put it back up. One of the things I want you to notice is, do you see, and this might be hard for you to see, but do you see some of the smaller statues next to Ramses' knees and legs?
Yes.
Well, if you look straight in the middle, you'll see a doorway leading into the temple. The smaller statue to the right is his queen, Nefertiti, and to the left of the doorway is his mother, Queen T. Between his legs are some of his favorite children. And above the doorway is the sun god Ra. Let's take a look inside the temple. Beautiful columns in the hypostyle hall, going in further, massive walls, all decorated with different scenes depicting events of Ramses' reign. This probably is the most well-known battle that Ramses was in. It is called the Battle of Kadesh. And you here see Ramses riding his chariot, shooting his arrows, and leading his horse in the campaign. Now, because he's the pharaoh and he's choosing to write history his way, he claims he was victorious and they won. Later history would show that his fight or battle at Kadesh was more of a draw, but it did lead to a peace treaty of many, many years. The one picture I showed you of the Apis bull carving, that was from this temple as well. The temple next door to the temple dedicated to Ramses II was dedicated to his wife, the Queen Nefertiti, and also to the goddess of, I'm getting tired, of Hathor. So what do you see in this picture? This is almost the end of our slideshow, but what do you see in this particular picture?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
I heard someone count 6. 6
Yes.
huge statues. Yeah, if you look at the people going in the doorway and you guesstimate that they're about 5.5 to 6 feet tall, you kind of get an idea of how tall, truly immense those statues are. They must be 30 or more feet tall. Are all the statues alike?
No.
No, they're all different. 4 of the 6 statues are of ancient gods and goddesses. There's Hathor, second on the left. But the 2 on our far right, as we look at the photograph, are King Ramses and his queen Nefertiti. What do you notice about the height? She's no longer coming up just to knee length. What do you notice about the height of these 2 statues?
He lost a leg.
They are the same height. And that's really an important feature of this temple. Ramses is showing that his queen was not only his beloved, but she was of equal status with him. He considered her a co-ruler of Egypt. And on her head, she wears the crown of Hathor, and on King Ramses' head, he wears the crown of the god Ra, the sun god. So they're telling us here, they're not just ordinary human beings. They're not just pharaoh, king, and queen. They are actually descendants of the gods. So there's a lot to learn from just viewing some of these ancient things. Inside were beautiful reliefs and columns, mostly showing Nefertiti playing the sistrum, which was a percussion instrument, showed her interacting with Hathor, showed the wonderful things she did for Egypt. So I couldn't say goodbye to you without sharing this slide with you. Okay, so where do you think we are?
You're still in.
You're on camera.
Giza?
Yeah.
Giza?
Yes. Okay, what made you guess Giza?
Because of all the pyramids in the
That's
distance.
right. Okay, and if you look behind us to the left, you can see the 3 great pyramids of Giza. If you look behind Jim, it's kind of foggy, it's kind of dusky because we're getting ready for the sun to set. But can you tell that it is the skyscraper of Cairo?
Yes, there's housing developments about 2 blocks away from the pyramids. They're way too close.
Doesn't that just amaze you? When we were traveling on a bus from Cairo to the pyramids, it's like, boom, they just appeared. It was so close.
I was disappointed. I didn't think they should allow people to build their homes that close to the pyramids.
Yeah, I was rather surprised too, but I guess, that's what happens. So, from looking at myself and my husband with our hands up going, look, Bob, no hands, you would think this is a carefree, comfortable ride, but you'd be wrong. First of all, I'm the littlest one in the group. There were 6 of us, and I'm on the biggest camel. I estimate I'm sitting about 10 feet up in the air. And if you look closely, I don't know if you can see, there is a little bit of padding that goes over the camel's hump. There's like a rug and then a little bit of padding. And the only thing I have to hold on to is the pommel right in front. There are no stirrups available on these saddles. So the only way you have to hold on is to clench your legs tightly against the side of your camel. So some of you may have ridden a camel before. It's not quite as comfortable as riding a horse. You get rolled from side to side, you get thrown forward and back, and sometimes you're going up and down. So I'm clenching for dear life to stay on my camel. I can't believe my camel's name was Charlie Brown. And Jim's camel was named Snoopy. Yeah. But it was a beautiful, beautiful ride out into the desert. The sunset was absolutely glorious. But the next day I paid for it. I could hardly walk. I was like one of those cowboys in the old Western movies that are bow-legged and kind of toddle back and forth. So.
Well, and Maureen, you forgot to say about how when you're down on the ground trying to get up on it and they lurch forward and you feel like you're going to go flying over their heads, and they are whining and complaining and snorting, and it's really quite interesting.
Yes, I think that's Sandy. Is that Sandy? You're
Yes.
absolutely right. When you get on, they are kneeling down, and you climb up with assistance, and they bring their, if I remember, their back legs up first. So you're thrown way forward, and then they bring their front legs up, and you're thrown back. I may have it reversed. I'm not exactly sure now, but it is scary. It's a scary moment. And when we first started wandering out into this desert, we were just kind of walking slowly along. But then our leader decided maybe we should canter. And I was like, I took like 1/2 of a minute of that, and I said, no, stop. Because it was too scary. I thought I was going to fall off for sure. So anyway, so this concludes my slideshow presentation. I really want to thank you all for joining in today on Zoom and sharing your wonderful observations. I'm going to stick around if you have comments or stories yourself about Egypt, or if you have questions that maybe I can answer. But you've been a wonderful audience, and it has been a total pleasure to share with you.
Thanks so much, Maureen. Does anybody have any questions?
Maureen, that was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. It is so much fun to share with all of you.
Go ahead, Anne. It looks like you've got a question.
Well, I just had something to add. If people were interested in going on a virtual tour of Egypt, Rhodes Scholar, which is a group that we've traveled with, is having virtual tours like in March and maybe other months too. But that's why we decided to do this too, to see if we wanted to do it. But I would really encourage you to check out Rhodes Scholars because they do an excellent job on virtual tours. You really feel like you're right there in the country.
Yeah, and AAA offers webinars to different places. So we've seen a number of different webinars. And there are many on the Discovery Channel and the Science Channel. There's a lot unearthed and different mysteries explained. There's a lot that they focus on about Egypt.
Also a personal connection. My mom was a nurse for doctors in Michigan. Probably this happened in the late 50s, early 60s. One of her doctors, OB doctors, was from Egypt, and from Cairo. And he had come to the United States to get his medical training and decided to stay here. Well, his family was quite wealthy and well-to-do in Cairo, And they were told that if he came back, he would never be able to leave again, and he would never be able to take any of their money, or they wouldn't be able to send anything to him. And he chose to stay in the United States. You know, I've lost contact with him. My mom worked for him for about 20 years or so. He was a wonderful doctor, but he wanted to stay in the United States. But that's how that's the control they had over, they wanted him to come back and be a doctor in Egypt, not stay in Cairo, and not stay in the United States.
Wow.
And who did you travel with to Egypt?
We went with a Canadian tour group, and the name escapes me right now. But we traveled, my husband and I got there early and did the exploration of the Serapeum and the Step Pyramid and the Bent Pyramid and the Red Pyramid and the Papyrus Museum and the Camel Trip. That was all done on our own without a tour. And the tour itself, we flew into Cairo, spent quite a bit of time in Cairo, then flew to Luxor, spent a lot of time in Karnak, Temple of Karnak and Valley of the Kings and Queens, and then took the riverboat down the Nile to Aswan and then flew back to Cairo. So I can't remember right now the name of the group, but it's out of Canada. It was one we had never heard of or traveled with before.
Okay. Looks like Janine's ready to go. Or she, that's the Mars landing, right? Yeah.
Oh, that's the Mars landing. Yeah, it happened.
It did.
It did. So, Maureen, I noticed that you changed from what you were in originally, and I'm wondering if you might stand up and just give us a little, yeah.
Okay.
So pretty.
Oh, thank you. My husband and I were both teachers, and we both love costumes. We had put on performances. That's why I love being a school ambassador with Lone Tree Arts Center and going out to the schools with the kids, and I dress up sometimes. This one is, I don't know how much you can see.
I was going to say, step back a little bit.
Yes.
So there you go. Perfect. Yeah, that's
great.
This
was a Halloween costume of Cleopatra, supposedly. It was a little low cut for me, so I put a little something more modest on. And then my husband was wearing the Pharaoh costume as well.
It's smashing.
Oh, yes.
Really well done. It's a tough act to follow. I will say that.
You like the eye makeup?
Oh yes.
Yes.
So
yeah.
Of course. And it was real special for me because my husband and I traveled to, in fact, I almost let him sit next to me here because we were in, where did you go again?
Egypt.
Yeah, so we were in Egypt in the 90s and just before they had some issues. And so that was a great time to travel. We really enjoyed it.
To put on my necklace.
Oh, yeah.
I was going to say, yeah.
I know, I forgot. I was, when Pharaoh was speaking, I had to make a quick costume change.
You just have so many jewels, so you'll just have to carry them with you and switch them around.
That's right. Jewel of the Nile.
Yeah.
All right.
I like it.
So did anybody have any other questions that maybe I didn't answer or things that I didn't show that you want to talk about?
How did you get the piece of papyrus back?
Oh, well, it wasn't framed at that point. So it was very pliable, and they rolled it up like you would a scroll, and they put it in a tube, a cardboard tube.
Mm-hmm. Like the Brady Bunch.
So, yeah. And actually, when we got it framed here, the frame cost more than the papyrus painting itself.
Yeah, I've heard that. We have friends who live in Tucson, and they went to Egypt and got many pieces, but they said the same thing, that it was much more expensive because I think they did sort of a preservation glass, like a non-glare glass or whatever, but they said that the framing was quite expensive, but the colors are just absolutely breathtaking.
They are, and the colors have meaning. And I think, Janine, you asked me before what the colors meant, so I had to do some research on that. But the blues are mainly made from copper and iron oxides, but the blues stand for fertility and birth, rebirth and life, and obviously water and heavens. The yellow was often ground up gold, and it was very expensive because Egypt didn't mine its own gold. It was always, they traded for that. But the gold obviously represents the sun and eternity and things like that. The green, I didn't go into all of the ancient gods. There are hundreds of them, but Osiris, who was a main god, his color, he's the god of the underworld, and he is always depicted with a green face. But green also symbolizes vegetation and life after death. And so all the colors have, a meaning to them, and red being the color of blood, life-giving, and also the power of fire, but it can also mean chaos and disorder. So it was fun. I was glad that Janine, you asked me that at the last time we did a dress rehearsal together, because I hadn't known that. I had to do some research.
Well done, really well done.
Oh, thank you.
It was fun.
I learned a lot. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you all for coming. Okay, well, I hope to see you again in 2 months in April.
That's right. So just so that everybody knows, our next Spark, I don't have the exact date on me, but it's in March, and it will be led by Janine, and it will be on the Commissioner's Choice exhibit, which is going up in our lobby very soon. And it's going to be a retrospective of art from 2020, art that was made during the pandemic, essentially. It's very interesting. I haven't seen any of the pieces yet, but I heard that it's really phenomenal. So please join us for that. And then in April, as Maureen said, she'll be back, and she'll be taking us to Morocco that time. So,
Wow, I haven't been there.
me either. I'm very excited. March 25th. Thank you very much, Janine. And believe me, we will let you know. We have your emails, and we'll be emailing you about that as it gets closer. Thanks so much for joining us today, everybody. Really appreciate seeing you. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you. That was lovely.
Well, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.